Humanity entered the galactic stage quietly, without grand announcements or displays of power. And at first, they seemed ordinary compared to older spacefaring races. They had slower ships, weaker weapons, and limited territory. Yet what unsettled the galaxy was not their technology, but their behavior. Humans did not think in straight lines. They questioned orders, challenged traditions, and adapted faster than any species the Galactic Council had ever studied. In early encounters, humans were expected to submit, as most young civilizations did. They were offered guidance, rules, and protection in exchange for obedience. But humans listened, learned, and then chose their own path. They followed some laws, ignored others, and constantly tested boundaries, not out of rebellion alone, but out of curiosity and survival instinct. When conflicts arose, humans reacted in unexpected ways. Instead of retreating or surrendering when outmatched, they improvised. They used damaged ships as weapons, turned civilian tools into defense systems, and sacrificed comfort for victory. Battles that should have ended in human defeat instead ended in costly stalemates or shocking reversals. Observers reported that humans fought differently depending on the situation. Sometimes they were diplomatic and calm, other times terrifyingly aggressive. They showed empathy to allies, yet merciless focus toward enemies who threatened their survival. This emotional range confused alien strategists who relied on predictable behavior patterns. The Galactic Council began collecting data, and the reports became more alarming over time. Humans learned from every loss, adapted to every threat, and shared knowledge rapidly across their species, a tactic many races avoided due to internal rivalries. Humanity's strength was not raw power, but unity under pressure. Council psychologists warned that humans possessed a dangerous trait. They refused to accept limits imposed by others. When told something was impossible, humans treated it as a challenge rather than a rule. When warned of extinction, they prepared to fight harder instead of seeking mercy. Trade partners admired human creativity, but feared their influence. Humans questioned ancient hierarchies, inspired younger species to think independently, and exposed weaknesses in long-standing systems, even without intending to. They disrupted balance simply by existing. The first major crisis came when a border conflict escalated. Humans were ordered to withdraw by the Council, but instead they negotiated, fortified, and defended their colonies while still calling for peace. This dual approach of diplomacy and readiness alarmed the Council more than open rebellion ever could. After the conflict ended, humans emerged scarred but stronger. Their technology improved, their tactics refined, and their confidence grew. They did not celebrate conquest, but they documented everything, preparing for future threats that only they seemed to anticipate. Behind closed doors, council members debated humanity's future. Some argued humans could become great defenders of the galaxy. Others believed they were a ticking threat, a species too adaptable, too emotional, and too unwilling to submit to centralized control. The final reports used one phrase repeatedly: humans could not be ruled the way others were. They would never fully submit, not because they sought domination, but because survival for them meant choice, freedom, and the right to decide their own fate. This realization frightened the galaxy more than any weapon. A species that could not be broken, could not be neatly controlled, and would always push beyond limits, was seen as unstable, even if their intentions were not evil. By the time the Council reached a conclusion, fear had already shaped the narrative. Humans were no longer viewed as newcomers, but as a future problem waiting to happen, a species that would not submit, and therefore, in the eyes of the galaxy, a species too dangerous to remain unchecked. The Galactic Council did not act quickly after identifying humanity as a concern. Instead, they watched, debated, and argued in long, closed sessions, each species bringing its own fear, bias, and political interest into the discussion. For many cycles, humans were studied like a problem that no one wanted to solve directly. Official records described humanity as unstable but not openly hostile, which made the decision harder. They were not invading neighbors. They were not demanding tribute, and they were not seeking galactic domination. Yet their refusal to fully submit made older civilizations uneasy. Some council members defended humans, pointing out their willingness to trade, cooperate, and protect allies. They argued that humanity's emotional nature also allowed compassion, loyalty, and sacrifice, qualities that had saved entire colonies during joint operations. Others strongly disagreed, warning that humanity's adaptability was a long-term threat. They presented simulations showing that in most future scenarios, humans either became independent power brokers or uncontrollable variables that disrupted galactic balance. The turning point came when intelligence analysts revealed how quickly humans reverse-engineered alien technology. Systems that took other races centuries to understand were adapted by humans in decades, sometimes years. This ability alone caused panic among civilizations that relied on technological superiority to maintain control. Council law was clear about one thing. Extinction votes required proof of immediate danger, and humans did not meet that requirement. Killing an entire species without direct cause would fracture the Council itself, creating civil war among member races. Exile, however, was legal, quiet, and effective. It removed a threat without bloodshed and allowed the Council to claim moral superiority. The idea was framed as containment rather than punishment. Publicly, the Council announced that humanity would be relocated for its own safety, citing instability along its borders and the risk of future conflict. The message was carefully crafted to sound protective rather than fearful. Privately, the language was much harsher. Humans were labeled a future weapon that could not be trusted, a species that learned too fast and questioned too deeply, and therefore could not be safely integrated into a controlled galactic system. The chosen destination was beyond mapped space, a region classified as a dead sector, filled with radiation storms, unstable stars, and ancient ruins. The Council believed no advanced civilization could survive there long term. Some members assumed humanity would slowly disappear, victims of harsh space rather than direct violence. Others suspected humans might survive, but remain isolated, cut off from influence and power. When the decision was finalized, no human representative was allowed to speak during the final vote. Communication was reduced to a single formal transmission informing humanity of the ruling mega. The announcement shocked human leadership, but it did not break them. Protests were filed, arguments presented, and compromises offered. Yet, the Council had already made its choice. Fear had outweighed trust. Military enforcement fleets were deployed to ensure compliance, not to attack, but to escort. A silent display of power meant to discourage resistance. Human civilians reacted with confusion, anger, and disbelief. Many had believed cooperation would protect them. Instead, they learned that obedience was never enough when fear ruled decisions. As evacuation began, the Council erased human history from shared databases, trade records were sealed, and cultural exchanges quietly ended. Humanity was not just exiled physically, but removed from the galactic story. To the wider galaxy, humans became a warning, a lesson about what happened to those who did not fit neatly into the system. Younger species learned to suppress independence to avoid similar judgment. Within council chambers, the decision was officially recorded as a success, a dangerous variable contained without war, order preserved without destruction. Yet some councilors felt unease. They had not defeated humanity. They had simply pushed it away. And deep down, many suspected that exile would not weaken humans, but change them. The final judgment did not declare humans evil. It declared them incompatible. And in that single word lay the galaxy's greatest mistake. Because instead of guiding humanity, the Council forced them to evolve alone, far from rules, far from oversight, and far from mercy. The journey into exile was long and unforgiving. Human fleets were escorted beyond familiar star lanes into regions no chart had fully mapped, stars flickered unpredictably, sensors failed often, and communication with the wider galaxy slowly faded until silence became permanent. For many humans, this moment marked the true beginning of exile. The dead sector was nothing like the Council's polished simulations. Radiation storms tore through hulls, unstable stars collapsed without warning, and planets that appeared stable from orbit often hid lethal environments. The first years were marked by loss. Ships were abandoned, colonies failed, and entire groups vanished into the dark. Food shortages became common. Supply chains designed for peaceful space collapsed under constant threat. Humans were forced to ration, recycle, and innovate just to survive another day. Old technologies were stripped apart and rebuilt into something new, not elegant, but functional. Fear spread quickly in the early settlements. Many believed the council had sentenced humanity to a slow death, yet even in despair, humans refused to wait for extinction. Survival became a shared purpose, stronger than politics or old divisions. Engineers studied the dead sector itself, learning how radiation behaved, how unstable gravity could be harnessed, and how ancient ruins scattered across the region hinted at civilizations that had once survived here. Humans were not the first to be abandoned, and that realization sparked determination. Scavenger teams explored broken megastructures and derelict stations older than recorded history. From these ruins, humans recovered fragments of forgotten technology, incomplete data cores, strange power systems, and weapons designed for wars no one remembered. Nothing was wasted. Living conditions were harsh. Children grew up under artificial skies, knowing danger as normal. Education shifted toward practical skills, survival training replaced comfort, and failure became a lesson rather than a shame. Humanity began to change at its core. There was no single government in exile. Instead, small alliances formed based on trust and necessity. Leaders rose not by birth or title, but by competence. Those who could keep people alive were followed without question. Conflict still existed among humans. Stress and loss fueled anger, but external danger forced resolution. Internal wars would mean extinction. This unspoken rule shaped exile society more than any law ever had. Over time, ships became stronger, built to endure radiation and impact. Engines were redesigned for unpredictability rather than efficiency. Weapons focused on precision and adaptability. Humans learned to fight environments before fighting enemies. Psychologists noted a shift in mindset. Fear no longer paralyzed people, it sharpened them. Humans became cautious but not hesitant. Every risk was calculated. Every sacrifice weighed against survival. Years passed, then decades. Exile turned into endurance, endurance into mastery. Colonies stabilized on worlds once thought impossible to inhabit. Life support systems merged with planetary ecosystems. Humans stopped trying to bend environments to comfort and instead adapted themselves. Stories of the old galaxy faded. The council became a distant memory, not hated, but irrelevant. New generations knew exile as home and danger as routine. When scouts mapped the dead sector fully, they realized something unsettling. This region was not empty. It was a graveyard of failed civilizations. And humanity had succeeded where countless others had not. This knowledge reshaped human identity. They were no longer victims. They were survivors of a cosmic test that few could pass. Exile was not just punishment, it was proof. Slowly, humanity stopped broadcasting distress signals. There was no one left to hear them. Instead, they focused inward, building, learning, preparing, though no one spoke it aloud. A shared belief formed. If the galaxy ever came looking again, humans would not be weak, they would not beg. Exile had stripped away dependence and replaced it with resolve. Beyond the stars, far from judgment and control, humanity did not disappear. It adapted, hardened, and learned the lesson. Exile was meant to teach them, survive or vanish, and humans chose survival every single time. Isolation did more than harden humanity. It reshaped how they thought, lived, and planned for the future. Once survival became stable, humans stopped reacting to danger and started preparing for it. Exile was no longer just a condition, it became a philosophy. Without the Galactic Council watching, humans were free to rebuild society from the ground up. Old political systems faded because they no longer worked in such an unforgiving place. Leadership became practical rather than symbolic. Those who could solve problems earned respect. Those who could not were left behind by necessity. Technology advanced in strange directions. Instead of focusing on beauty or prestige, humans focused on reliability. Systems were built with layers of backups. Ships were designed to be repaired in deep space with limited tools. Weapons were modular and adaptable, able to change function mid-battle. The ancient ruins of the dead sector played a major role in this evolution. Humans never fully understood the civilizations that built them, but they learned enough to combine alien principles with human creativity. This led to breakthroughs. The Council never predicted, not stronger weapons alone, but smarter systems. Artificial intelligence was treated differently than in the old galaxy. Instead of strict limitations, humans developed cooperative AI, systems designed to argue, question, and improve alongside humans. These machines did not replace people. They challenged them, making mistakes less fatal and planning more precise. Human culture also changed. Stories of Earth and the early colonies became lessons rather than nostalgia. Children were taught not just history, but reasoning, why choices were made, what mistakes led to exile, and how fear shaped the galaxy's judgment. Emotion was not suppressed, it was disciplined. Humans understood that rage without control led to destruction, while fear without action led to death. Training focused on balance, teaching individuals to think clearly even under extreme pressure. Military structure evolved quietly. There were no massive standing armies. Instead, every ship, every colony, and every citizen was trained to defend themselves. Defense became distributed, flexible, and unpredictable, exactly the opposite of council doctrine. Humans stopped preparing for known enemies and started preparing for unknown ones. Simulations ran constantly, imagining threats that did not yet exist. Strange physics, overwhelming numbers, ancient beings, nothing was dismissed as impossible. Trade within human space became cooperative rather than competitive. Resources were shared based on need and long-term survival. Hoarding was discouraged, not by law, but by social consequence. Anyone who endangered others for personal gain was removed from decision-making roles. Over generations, physical adaptation followed mental evolution. Humans modified themselves subtly, not into something unrecognizable, but into something more resilient. Enhanced radiation tolerance, improved neural stress processing, and faster recovery from injury. All carefully regulated to avoid losing what made them human. Faith and philosophy shifted as well. Many abandoned the idea that the universe was fair, instead believing it was neutral. Survival was not a reward, it was a responsibility. This belief created a quiet determination across all human settlements. The concept of revenge against the council faded. Hatred required energy better spent on preparation. Instead, humans focused on one promise: never be helpless again. Never depend on the mercy of others. Communication networks expanded across the dead sector, encrypted, layered, and independent. Humans could coordinate across vast distances without exposing themselves, a shadow civilization growing stronger without being seen. By the time centuries passed, humanity no longer thought of itself as exiled. Exile implied temporary removal. This was permanence, a separate path of evolution, disconnected from galactic norms. From the outside, if anyone had been watching, they would have seen no signs of aggression. No expansion fleets, no messages of warning or challenge. Humanity remained silent, patient, and unseen. Inside human space, however, preparation never stopped. Every generation inherited the same lesson. Survival was earned, freedom was defended, and submission was never an option, again. Isolation had done what the Council feared most. It had removed restraint without removing responsibility. Humanity did not become wild. It became focused, disciplined, and ready. In trying to control a future threat, the galaxy had unknowingly created one that no longer needed approval, guidance, or permission to act. Humanity had evolved alone, and that evolution was far from finished. The galaxy had grown complacent over centuries, many civilizations believing that exile had weakened humanity, and that the dead sector was a quiet, irrelevant corner of space. Governments focused on trade, diplomacy, and internal disputes, rarely thinking beyond their borders. They assumed threats would be predictable, controllable, and manageable. Without warning, the first signs appeared. Entire star systems vanished from sensors. Fleets sent to investigate were destroyed or went missing. No known enemy claimed responsibility, and panic began to spread among species that had once considered themselves secure, their networks of communication filled with rumors, speculation, and fear. Alien historians and strategists struggled to understand the threat. Ancient texts and simulations failed to predict the speed or precision of the attacks. Fleets designed to overwhelm young civilizations were obliterated before reinforcements could arrive, and entire colonies were evacuated too late to save most of their population. Galactic leaders debated endlessly, proposing alliances, emergency mobilizations, and defensive measures. Yet every strategy collapsed against an enemy that was invisible, adaptable, and ruthless. Their tactics did not match any known species. They struck with speed and precision that suggested knowledge far beyond anything currently cataloged. Civilian populations panicked, sending refugees into overcrowded starports, while militaries scrambled to hold frontiers. But every attempt to engage the attacker failed. Even the most experienced commanders could not predict the enemy's movements, and morale fell as loss after loss mounted. Fear spread faster than fleets could respond. During this chaos, stories began to circulate about unidentifiable ships appearing at critical moments, arriving suddenly to repel the attacks. Entire fleets were destroyed, yet not a single civilian world under threat was lost. Observers could not explain the sudden salvation. The ships moved with impossible coordination, and no known species claimed them. Scientists analyzed the attacks, noting patterns that suggested intelligence rather than random aggression. The enemy seemed to anticipate every defensive maneuver, exploiting weaknesses in formation and technology. It was as if the attacker had been preparing for this moment for centuries, understanding human and alien systems alike. Panic turned to disbelief when the same ships began pushing back the aggressors. Entire fleets were turned to dust, outnumbered enemies were systematically dismantled, and communications intercepted from the battlefields suggested strategy unlike anything recorded before. It was precise, disciplined, and terrifying in its efficiency. As the galaxy watched, some began to suspect the impossible. These were not fleets of the Council, nor any known ally. Their technology did not match anything registered in official archives, and their coordination suggested a species that had mastered not only survival, but warfare in extreme environments. A species previously thought exiled and broken. Reports of alien leaders attempting negotiation and failing spread quickly. Messages sent to the unidentified forces returned unanswered. Yet the attacks on hostile fleets stopped whenever civilians were threatened, creating a growing belief that whoever was intervening had its own agenda, distinct from conquest or conquest-like motives. Every new battle confirmed the suspicion. The galaxy's saviors were humans, evolved, disciplined, and equipped with technology no one had anticipated. They acted decisively, systematically dismantling threats while preserving life wherever possible, yet never making themselves fully known or claiming territory. The Galactic Council, previously confident in exile as a solution, was forced into a crisis of credibility. Their centuries of judgment and predictions had failed utterly. Intelligence reports no longer guided action. Fleets could no longer hold strategic advantage, and panic replaced careful planning in every chamber of command. Across the stars, older species realized that humanity's absence had not been a sign of weakness, but a strategic retreat. Exile had not destroyed them. It had allowed humans to grow without interference, free to learn, innovate, and perfect methods of survival and defense that no council directive could have produced. Fear began to replace curiosity in galactic minds. Diplomats who had once dismissed humanity as irrelevant now feared what they had created through exile. The dead sector was no longer forgotten, and whispers of humans returning spread like wildfire, a mixture of hope and dread coloring every report. By the time the first humans openly engaged in battle, the galaxy was already on edge. Every civilization understood that they had underestimated the species they had chosen to exile. And for the first time in history, fear of the unknown was justified because the unknown had arrived, perfectly prepared, and unrelenting. When the first human fleets appeared in contested space, the galaxy barely recognized them. Ships unlike any known designs moved with fluid precision, sleek but heavily reinforced, engines glowing with power that suggested advanced energy manipulation. Weapon systems were modular, able to adapt instantly to different threats, and every maneuver was calculated with perfect timing. The humans did not announce themselves. They simply acted, appearing at critical moments in battles where entire planets or fleets were about to fall. Their sudden presence turned hopeless situations into victories. The aggressors were thrown into chaos, unable to predict tactics that combined patience, cunning, and ruthlessness. Alien commanders initially assumed these were advanced mercenaries or rogue allies, but the scale and coordination of the fleets soon disproved that idea. Humans communicated across vast distances without detectable signals, their coordination flawless even under extreme conditions. Every ship acting as part of a larger intelligence rather than individual crews. Every strike they made was measured, precise, and devastating. Yet civilians and neutral systems were left untouched. Historians later recorded that human fleets destroyed enemy supply lines, command centers, and warships without unnecessary collateral damage, a balance of force and mercy that confused observers and terrified opponents. Galactic sensors captured strange anomalies. Ships appearing out of hyperspace in impossible positions, deploying tactics that defied conventional physics. Enemies could not anticipate maneuvers or counter them effectively. The humans seemed to understand not only strategy, but the psychology of their foes, predicting reactions and exploiting weaknesses instantly. Rumors began to spread among the affected civilizations. Some whispered that the humans had studied the galaxy during exile, learning every known system, every fleet movement, and every potential weakness. Training in isolation had made them masters, not just of technology, but of foresight and adaptability. For the Council, disbelief turned into panic. Their fleets were engaged. Yet human ships intervened without allegiance to any faction, siding neither with the Council nor with the aggressors. Their actions suggested purpose beyond politics, a code that valued survival, balance, and precision above conquest or loyalty. The humans did not seek recognition. No diplomatic signals were sent. No claims of glory were made, yet entire battlefields recognized them as the turning point. Enemy fleets that had seemed unstoppable were obliterated in hours. Entire star systems were stabilized, and refugees who had once feared annihilation now witnessed salvation at the hands of the exiled species. Alien observers noted an unusual pattern. Human ships avoided direct confrontation when possible, instead using clever tactics, environmental hazards, and strategic misdirection. Traps were set with minimal loss, every engagement taught lessons, and every victory was a blueprint for the next operation. Even when heavily outnumbered, human formations never faltered. They maintained flexibility, shifting positions fluidly, concentrating fire only where it was decisive, retreating only to reorganize and strike again. Opponents found it impossible to predict human responses, creating chaos and fear. News of their interventions spread quickly. Older civilizations that had once dismissed humanity as weak began to prepare defensively, but human fleets rarely lingered. Appearing only where needed and vanishing afterward, their presence was a promise rather than an occupation, a shadow that reshaped the battlefield without claiming territory. Across the galaxy, populations began to hope again, seeing that someone, or something, was willing to fight with skill and mercy. Yet fear remained because no one could approach these humans, communicate with them, or understand their motives. Their silence made them legends, both feared and revered. By the time the Council attempted to contact these fleets, they had already withdrawn, leaving defeated enemies behind, strategic positions stabilized, and a lingering question in every mind. Who were these humans, and what had exile truly done to them? Every report confirmed the same terrifying conclusion. The species that had once been exiled for being dangerous was now the most precise, disciplined, and unpredictable force the galaxy had ever encountered. Their arrival was not conquest, it was judgment, and no one could anticipate what came next. When humanity finally made contact with the wider galaxy, it was not with demands, speeches, or declarations. Their fleets did not circle planets claiming territory, and their ships did not broadcast messages of domination. Instead, humans appeared with quiet authority, acting only when necessary, and leaving an undeniable presence wherever they intervened. The Galactic Council, long accustomed to giving orders and expecting compliance, found itself powerless. The very species they had exiled now operated independently, enforcing rules that the Council could neither control nor predict. Their tactics were precise, their motives deliberate, yet their purpose was clear: to remind the galaxy of the consequences of fear and exile. In the first direct encounter, human representatives boarded a neutral station, not to negotiate, but to demonstrate capability. Their presence alone shifted the balance of power. Alien delegates who had once dismissed humans now saw individuals capable of reasoning, strategy, and restraint, all wrapped in a confidence that no threat could shake. Humans spoke little of past grievances. They did not demand revenge, yet every action reflected the lessons learned during exile. Efficiency, patience, and controlled force were their tools. The galaxy realized that these were not reckless survivors, but a species forged into something stronger by adversity. Enemies who had once threatened systems now faced organized, coordinated responses. Humans did not pursue endless war. Instead, they targeted aggressors with precision, disabling fleets, securing civilians, and dismantling command structures without unnecessary destruction. Mercy was not weakness. It was a principle learned over generations of isolation. The Council attempted to assert authority, sending envoys and fleets to engage. But humans ignored political hierarchy. Their obedience was to their own judgment, not to a distant and fearful organization. Every refusal was measured, deliberate, and carried the weight of experience that the Council could not match. Public perception shifted quickly. Populations who had feared extinction now celebrated survival. Historians began recording events in real time, acknowledging that humanity had transformed from the exiled underdogs into decisive, almost mythical figures whose intervention had saved countless lives. The irony was stark. The species feared for being dangerous had become the savior. Diplomatic channels opened cautiously, yet humans dictated terms subtly, not with aggression, but through demonstrated competence. Their message was clear. Humanity would act where necessary, protect where possible, and never submit again. This was not arrogance. It was the natural outcome of centuries of enforced independence. Some council members pleaded for reconciliation, offering treaties, trade incentives, and privileges. But humans considered these gestures secondary. Respect had to be earned, and their standards were uncompromising. Only those who demonstrated integrity, competence, and fairness would be acknowledged. Not because of politics, but because survival demanded it. Through their actions, humans also sent a warning to the galaxy that fear and exile could create power that no one could control. The lessons of the past were not ignored. Every choice made in exile had built resilience, foresight, and discipline. And the Council now faced the consequences of having underestimated a species they had thought contained it. Military analysts observed that human strategy combined logic, psychology, and adaptability. They adjusted to every new threat instantly, exploited weaknesses without hesitation, yet maintained moral consistency. Aliens noted that humans were not driven by greed, conquest, or ideology, but by principle, proving that power without control could still be restrained by purpose. For the first time, the galaxy understood that the very characteristics that had frightened the Council, independence, adaptability, and unpredictability, were now assets used to protect, not destroy. Yet this protection carried an unmistakable edge, a reminder that humans were not to be commanded, and any attempt to do so could be catastrophic. Civilians and soldiers alike began to see humanity as a force beyond politics, a guardian species shaped by exile, neither tyrant nor ally, acting only where necessity demanded. Their silence, precision, and restraint combined to create a presence that was both reassuring and terrifying. For no one could anticipate the full scope of human judgment. In every engagement, in every negotiation, the message became clear. Humanity had survived, adapted, and evolved. The species that had been feared for its potential was now feared for its mastery. The Council and the galaxy learned a profound lesson. Humans would not submit, but they would act decisively. And the consequences of exile had returned to define the balance of power in the stars. The galaxy was forever changed by humanity's return. The species, once exiled for being dangerous, now stood as a central force, not seeking empire, not demanding tribute, but existing as a reminder of the consequences of fear and misjudgment. Civilizations that had once ignored humanity now watched carefully, measuring every move, every fleet, every settlement. Humanity did not conquer worlds, but their presence alone reshaped political and military landscapes. Systems that had once been considered stable found themselves vulnerable to influence and action from a species that refused to obey. The Council discovered that control could no longer be enforced through decree, and that fear of retribution was insufficient. Trade networks, alliances, and treaties had to be reconsidered. Every species now assumed that humans could intervene at any moment, not for conquest, but for judgment. Their principles had been tested and honed during centuries of exile, and they applied them with precision, neutrality, and discipline, making humans a force that could not be ignored. Cultural perceptions of humans shifted dramatically. History books rewritten to include tales of survival, ingenuity, and moral restraint. Stories circulated of humans saving entire colonies without asking for reward. using tactics and technologies unknown to the galaxy. And yet, never overstepping into unnecessary aggression, these accounts spread quickly, creating both admiration and unease. The Galactic Council faced an existential reckoning. Their past decision to exile humanity now appeared short-sighted. While they had removed a perceived threat temporarily, they had allowed it to grow unchecked, free from oversight, and capable of acting with unmatched efficiency. A species once feared for potential danger had become unstoppable in its preparedness and purpose. Every planet, every fleet, every population now calculated humanity into its strategy. Even those who had never directly encountered humans assumed their influence existed somewhere nearby, a shadow force acting according to its own rules, unseen but effective, reshaping diplomacy, war, and commerce alike. Humans themselves maintained a controlled presence. They did not expand aggressively. They did not demand loyalty, but they remained ready, disciplined, and observant. They acted only when necessary, and each action reinforced a lesson learned during exile. Power without submission could be wielded responsibly, but it would not bow to external authority. Civilizations that had once mocked or dismissed humans now sought cautious engagement, sending envoys carefully, offering assistance selectively, and always aware that any misstep could provoke intervention. Humans had not forgotten exile, and the lesson it taught them, that survival depended on vigilance, autonomy, and calculated action, was now embedded in every decision theirs. The galaxy slowly understood that humanity's exile had produced something unique, a species neither entirely alien nor entirely predictable, capable of immense power but guided by principle rather than desire for control. Their actions demonstrated that danger and morality could coexist, that strength could be tempered by wisdom, and that freedom could be protected without chaos. Historians and philosophers debated the implications for generations, noting that humans were no longer just a species, but a symbol of resilience, adaptation, and consequence. The very fears that had driven the Council to exile them were now validated, yet in a way that was unexpected. The galaxy had learned that forcing survival created not submission, but mastery. Across the stars, humans established a pattern. They would act decisively, protect when necessary, and remain independent, unbound by prior authority. Their presence was permanent but unobtrusive, and every civilization, from the smallest colony to the oldest empire, learned to coexist with the knowledge that humans could never again be ignored or underestimated. Even allies of the Council realized that humanity's return was not punishment or revenge, but a recalibration, a reminder that power, when shaped by struggle and discipline, could be guided by principle, and that survival and freedom, when combined with wisdom, produced a species capable of reshaping the galaxy without conquest. The ultimate consequence of exile was clear. Humans were no longer just survivors. They were masters of their destiny, respected and feared, their independence absolute. And the galaxy had no choice but to accept that the most dangerous species was the one that had been forced to evolve alone. And from that evolution came not only strength, but justice. In every corner of space, the story of humanity became legend, a species that had been cast out, forced to endure, and had returned not as conquerors, but as arbiters, saviors, and symbols of consequence, a living testament that the galaxy itself must now live with the choices it once made, and that exile, intended as punishment, had become the crucible of destiny.